Welcome, everyone. Glad you can join us this evening to hear Sarah Green speak to us about creating spaces to transform historical harms. Sarah was born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware, and has spent the past 17 years dedicated to supporting her community here in the 19802 zip code through community organizing, advocacy, and nonprofit work. A co-founder of Urban Bike Project, she served as executive director there for 8 years and set the foundation for what is still a thriving organization serving hundreds of youth and adults in Wilmington every year. Sarah also helped found and co-chaired Safe Schools, a Building People Power education advocacy campaign. Most recently, she was hired as executive director at Delaware, Pacem and Terris, where she encouraged the organization to become a fully democratic workplace and is now one of 4 co-directors, equalizing staff pay and creating a shared leadership structure. She's a proud mother of a student at Warner Elementary and is a lifelong advocate for the people of Wilmington. So thank you, Sarah. We're so glad to have you with us this evening.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I feel like there are so many things that have been going through my head recently, and it seems like a perfect time to just kind of talk about them all. And I'm glad that you are all here. I really love that you have this group and that you guys are so dedicated to listening to something new every week. So yeah, I'm grateful to be here, and also want to say hi to Sue. Sue Weisinger is one of our volunteers who I don't know if she was also instrumental in getting me here, but she's amazing. And Judy is also longtime Pacem and Terris advocate and used to be on our board. So yeah, lots of familiar faces. So this is wonderful. And this is also going to be very informal. I'm not going to do a slideshow or anything. I'm just basically going to talk, and then we're going to kind of open it up for some of the format of the circle dialogue that I'm going to be talking about. And like I said, there's been a lot on my mind, a lot of things that are kind of all coming together with everything that's been going on in the world, in my work, in my personal life. So it's going to be kind of story based. I think we have a lot to learn from each other's stories, and so I shouldn't shy away from telling my story. So, as Sue and I just found out that we have the same alma mater, I went to Mount Pleasant High School. Yeah, I'm Wilmington born and raised, so I've been here basically my whole life. I went through public schools my whole K-12 career. And I'm not going to say I loved high school, but I did find the experience. I don't think I realized until afterwards how healthy of an experience it was, in that I was experiencing kind of like the real world. I graduated Mount Pleasant, and then I went to University of Pennsylvania, and it was a huge culture shock. And that's when I think I started realizing that most of the people here at this Ivy League institution really have no concept of how the rest of the world lives. And so I think that started me feeling grateful that I had been brought up the way I had. And I had never felt particularly connected to Wilmington as when I was growing up. But after, leaving, going to school, I moved out to the West Coast for 1 year. And I just really felt pulled to come back here. And I think part of that was, I went to Portland, Oregon, where everybody's an advocate and everybody's a social justice warrior, and everybody is, has these good progressive thoughts. And it felt a little bit like living in a bubble. And it also felt a little bit like cheating or something. And I just really felt like my presence here is not really going to make much of an impact. There's lots of people who are trying to fight for the same things, but in Wilmington, I really could do something, because a lot of people who have progressive thoughts just leave. And so I came back after that, and I have stayed here ever since. So, I didn't really have, I didn't really have a career path. I didn't say to myself, oh, I want to work in nonprofits for the rest of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just came back here, and it was just happenstance that I got into bikes, as in bicycles, when I was out on the West Coast. And I came back and connected with some friends from high school who also rode bikes, basically the only people that I could find around here who did. And we worked on bikes in the street. We lived in the 9th Ward. And the neighborhood kids knew that we worked on bikes, and they flocked to us, and they wouldn't leave us alone. And I mean, I loved the kids. It was great. But it became very clear very, very quickly that there has to be some kind of resource for these kids. It can't just be us. Like, every time we try to go inside and watch TV, there's a knock on the door like, hey, can I get a pump? So we were very young and very naive, and we're like, oh, well, this resource doesn't exist. Let's just create it, because clearly the kids need it. Did not know what I was getting myself into, but I don't regret it. It was a labor of love. I think that I learned so much through that experience. So I co-founded Urban Bike Project. I was the executive director there for 8 years. And all of that was while I had 2 or 3 other jobs at the same time, because I never got paid until the very end, when I was trying to leave, basically. I learned a lot about our city. I learned a lot about our kids. I learned a lot about why the problems are happening, because I was experiencing it firsthand. And even though I grew up like side by side with some of those stories, it was a different perspective coming back as an adult, and actively like creating a service that there was like a very big reason why these services were needed, right? Kids are out on the streets after school. There's nothing positive for them to do. And we created a positive thing for them to do. And then the stress was just like, how can we handle the huge influx of all these kids? So, like I said, I always had 2 or 3 other jobs while I was at Urban Bike Project. And even after I left there, I have been through, I think I counted the other day, I've actively worked, like gotten a paycheck from over 10 nonprofits in Wilmington. And that's not including the ones that I've worked with tangentially, or community organizations that aren't nonprofits. So I've been around, and I've experienced, here's my city. I love my city, and I feel committed to doing something to uplift the community that I feel like I'm a part of, the community that I feel like, I benefited from growing up here. So I have a commitment to see what I can do to make things better. And what I found was, unfortunately, I mean, I think you all probably know, if you're in this room, there are so many obstacles to this work that we want to do. And the nonprofit sector is not great to work in. They ask a lot of you, because the reason they hired you is because you have passion. You don't get paid. You're caring. You care. The reason you're doing this job is because you care. And the fact that you care makes it even harder when the problems that you're trying to solve can't be solved. They can't be solved for one reason or another. A lot of times it's that each individual interaction, you may have an impact there, but if we're not changing the systems, then these problems are just going to keep recurring. And so I have felt a lot of frustration about that in particular. And so I had known about Pacem and Terris for a long time. Actually, Sally Milbury Steen, who I'm sure all of you know, she helped me write my very first grant for Urban Bike Project, because a friend of mine, dear friend of mine, Teresa Sullivan, introduced us way back then. So I knew Sally. I had actually applied for the job when Medard was leaving and did not get it. And that was great for me personally, because then COVID happened. And anyway, when the next executive director left Pacem and Terris, I think Sally recommended that they say, well, why don't you see if Sarah still wants to do this job? And my perspectives really shifted during COVID. I think that it changed a lot of us. And I just I had been leading as a volunteer an education advocacy group, and got so burnt out from that and had to step away. And then I was actually unemployed for a little while and got to spend some time just home with my family. And my father-in-law had just died, and things really shifted in my head. And when they came to me and asked if I wanted to do the job, I had to really think about it. And I actually didn't want to do it, because running a nonprofit is really hard. It's really hard to be up against these obstacles that are systemic and so hard to change. And you have to find the funding to even exist. So I wasn't super gung-ho about being an executive director, but I did love the organization. So I said, I'll help you guys out. How about I come on as interim executive director, and either we'll see if it's a good fit, or I'll help you find someone new. And as it turns out, it was a really great fit. And the board unanimously agreed when I said, I'll stay if you will help me turn this into a democratic workplace. And I know I feel like I'm getting off the topic here, but I feel like it's important. This is a big part of my story, because when you're fighting for social justice and you are burnt out and you're not getting a paycheck and you're being asked to do things that are impossible, it's just really easy to give up. And I knew that I wanted an organization that could create a culture where the people who are doing this work had more support, where they didn't have to just give up, just leave. And what has happened has been incredibly beautiful. It's been the most supportive workplace I've ever had, going through some crazy life circumstances. And now one of our co-directors is out on maternity leave. And here's like this is what is amazing to me. I never had a penny of maternity leave. I never even had benefits at a job. But the fact that I could make an organization into a place where we could pay a young Black mother to go take care of her family, that just meant the world to me. And so here we are. I think that at another time, if anyone's interested, I'm so happy to talk to you more about like the cooperative model, the shared authority, shared decision-making process. But it kind of goes hand in hand in the fact that when we look at our work in our community, it's really the shared authority is so important to the work that we do outside. That's why we have to practice it inside, because we're not doing anything to our community or for them. We want to do everything with our community. And I think that's a really important aspect of some social services that really act like a Band-Aid effect and don't create actual change. They do great things, don't get me wrong, and they help individuals. But when you're handing something to someone, when you're doing something for someone, it's a very different effect than when you're empowering people to take this journey together. So I'm gonna move on. Let's see. Well, I will just say, for the sake of my time here at Pacem and the fact that you are all here from Westminster, I've actually had I was here speaking a few years ago for another group, an education advocacy group. I worked with Westminster when I was in refugee resettlement. So I know that you guys are an awesome group and doing awesome things and showing up here in the community. So I really appreciate you having me here, wanting to know about our organization, the work that we do. I also, you guys have always been, since the very beginning, you have been hosts for our Traveling Peace Youth Art exhibition, which is like the only program, honestly, that lasted through that executive director transition. And it's just such a beautiful thing that it means a lot to us when local organizations partner with us and show a commitment that like we want to do this together. So I say all this to thank you for your consistency as a congregation, and the fact that you guys really are putting the work in. So that has been a standout point to me in my experience in Wilmington and also at Pacem. And so that is kind of another part of what happened when I came on board at Pacem. If in the little description that we sent out, I know we mentioned that Pacem and Terris was founded in the Vietnam era. So it's old, it's been around. I'm sure that you guys have all been keeping tabs on lots of the things that Sally was doing, that the organization has done. But there was one point that was pretty important to me when I came on, and that was, of course, it's so important to be a voice against war, a voice against violence, to stand up for peace. And we as humans need to be careful about where we put our energy, because there's only so much to go around. And what I saw was this incredible opportunity to use that energy in this place right here at our doorstep, where we could make a much bigger impact than, say, I'm not gonna dance around what's happening in Israel, Palestine. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But those things that are so horrifying and they're huge and they're so far away and we feel so helpless. And I don't know how to fix that, except for part of the work that we're doing right here, addressing the historical harms that are happening right here, can open us up to each other in a way that we can support each other and help us hold the pain of these things that are happening worldwide. So I really believed heavily that the local was really important to focus on. And I think it's really awesome because it's groups like this where I know you guys are all right down the street. We went to the same high school together. I mean, together at different times. I just think when I'm recounting my life and I'm thinking about my story, it revolves heavily around this place. And if we're talking about making peace, then of course we need that here, because one of the things that has really broken my heart the most since since coming back as an adult and seeing what happens, seeing how people who want opportunities, people who have progressive ideas, people who want to do good things in the world, they leave. And what that leaves is this incredibly segregated city. And it also just so happens that like the divide between a lot of white communities and Black communities here in Wilmington is really not so different from the divide in Israel and Palestine. It's not publicized. It's not on the news like that. We don't have a death toll quite so high, but it's not so different. And the fact is that all of these conflicts have human beings on both sides, and all those humans have stories. And if the humans on both sides could listen to a story from the other side with an open heart, that opens the door for any peacemaking that can possibly come. it's hearing someone's story. It's really being able to listen and engage with who they are as a human that takes away some of these huge conflicts that just grow and grow. And honestly, I mean, desegregation happened how many decades ago? But here we are. Our schools are some of the most segregated in the country. So, you know, it's I guess it's just everything that happens in the world, I see a way for us to address it here. And so I want to talk about one tool in particular that we've been using at Pacem. We've been using circle dialogues, or we call them community listening circles. And our next one is on Tuesday. We're having them every month, hoping to move it up to 2 or 3 times a month soon. But the community listening circles are a really incredible tool. And before I get to talk too much about the circles, I want to talk a little bit more about like the framework that we're approaching this work from. And that framework is called Transforming Historical Harms. And that is actually a project of the Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peace Building. So Transforming Historical Harms, and if anyone's interested, it's a really great document. It's only about 100 pages. I could drop the link in the chat later if anyone's interested. It's great. It is deep and you learn a lot. And I think that because you guys are coming to these things all the time, you'll really appreciate the context and what it has to offer. But basically, it's a framework for addressing, for healing generational trauma. And so for the sake of just clarity, I'll just talk about generational trauma as these are the things that have been passed down. So since slavery, since Europeans colonized this continent, right, there have been ongoing traumas, and they have been passed down through generations. And those, what they call legacies and aftermath, those are the parts that still are part of our society. They're still causing problems, still holding the different sides of the spectrum apart. And so you can see the generational trauma very easily if you really think about it, if you look at it. So you have, we have violence and poverty in our city. We have very discrete pockets of poverty and higher violence. And you can trace it all the way back. I mean, first we have a country based on slavery, right? Where, that's violence to the utmost, right? And then slavery is no longer legal, but it's actually still enacted through the 13th Amendment, through Black codes and Jim Crow. All of these things are just their movements along the timeline, but they're actually keeping those same structures in place, those same beliefs that people had to take on these beliefs in order to subjugate human beings, right? In order for us to profit from slave labor, right? You can't be able to see someone else as a human being. You have to create a narrative that says it's okay for me to do this because XYZ. And so the Transforming Historical Harms is really taking a look at those legacies, those beliefs, those narratives that have been so ingrained in us for generations that they have now caused all of these problems that we see now. It's just not as clear cut anymore because the actual trauma, slavery, happened a long time ago, but it's still with us very clearly. And you can really trace it pretty easily if you take a look. So the big thing about Transforming Historical Harms is they have 4 components. They say that these 4 components have to go together, or else this isn't going to work, right? And those 4 components are facing history, making connections, healing wounds, and taking action. I'm going to keep going over these 4 things, and we're going to talk about how our community listening circles really help in all 4 of these aspects. So it's facing history, making connections, healing wounds, and taking action. So facing history seems, pretty clear cut, right? We have to actually look. We have to not close our eyes to things that happened or continue to happen. We have to have the courage to look at things that are horrific, and we don't want to accept that they happened, but we can't heal from them if we can't look at them first. And one of the biggest things is that with oppression, the oppressor's story always wins. That's the story that's in the history books. That's the story that becomes these legacies and aftermaths that create these laws that keep these things in place. So when we're facing history, we really have to look for those unheard stories, the stories that got erased, the stories of a humanity that got dehumanized, and thinking deeply about not only about other people's stories, but also how you personally have been impacted, because that's another thing that sometimes we don't want to really look too deeply at because it's really painful. So after facing history, there's making connections. And this is also like makes a lot of sense to me. Interpersonal connections are like basically like what we're here for, right? It's the best part about life. And it's also so crucial. If you're going to change anything, you have to have that relationship first. So it's the ability to really listen deeply, to get to know another person, to learn from their experience, and to connect as humans, to see something that you maybe didn't see a minute ago because you just didn't know them that well. And I think that it's really just the most important thing for breaking down barriers. And that's the legacies and aftermaths have created these barriers where we see each other as the other, or we see someone as on the other side of the spectrum. It's the ability to make that connection and realize that like, oh, actually we're more human together than our differences. And then the healing wounds is a little bit more, I think you have to think a little bit more deeply about this, because when we think about healing, even when we're talking about it from a philosophical or spiritual standpoint, I mean, a lot of our society just thinks like, okay, mental health, therapists, processing my own stuff, which is great. And I'm a huge proponent of that, but we have to look at it in a bit of a different context, I think. And I'm going to read something here straight from the book that says, the Transforming Historical Harms framework includes all groups that have participated in and have been touched by the historical trauma and harms, rather than focusing exclusively on the group or groups that have been named the victims. There is clear and ample evidence that in the context of massive and historical trauma, those who were victimized, those who perpetrated, those who were bystanders, and descendants of each group are all affected. It is our assumption that participation and healing is required at some point for all groups in order for the approach to be effective. Not only is it requisite for all groups to participate, but for consideration to be made for the unique manifestations of trauma across generations for each group, and for healing interventions to occur at the individual and group levels. So I think that is so, so important, especially for white people trying to do this work. Because very often, I mean, I know you all know the term white savior. So often we see ourselves as not having been traumatized, right? We are, if you are part of the like dominant group, right? You come at it from this angle of like, oh, I need to help. Oh, I need to give. But actually, like, everyone who has been part of this historical harm has been hurt. Everyone is experiencing something, and everyone has something to heal from. And that really helps with this whole like working with instead of doing things to or for, because we are all humans. We are not better than, we're like, we have all been hurt by this historical harm. And I really think that that is so important to address, because without that, it's very like, it's dehumanizing, right? So if you see yourself as someone who hasn't been affected, but like, oh, it's my obligation to help someone who has, that's very different than saying we both were affected in different ways and let's work together to get over that. So I really appreciate that. And then, okay, so I'm going to go over these 4 again. So we had facing history, making connections, healing wounds, and taking action. Taking action is maybe the most obvious and the least doable thing. I mean, taking action is so hard. It's so hard. I think all of you know that, like, we want to save the world, we want to make things better, and it's just really like our options are limited. So that's another thing that I really love about these circles, is that we can come together and really just have the space to imagine, what if I could take action? What action would I take? What if I could do something that would actually change it? What would that look like? Because the space to imagine those things is really important when we're living in a society where it doesn't feel possible. If we don't have the space to imagine what could be, then we can never get there. So we see the community listening circles as like one part. Absolutely, I am not trying to claim that we are going to transform historical harms here in Wilmington all by ourselves with these community listening circles. I'm saying they are one part of looking at society from this framework, and that they do address all 4 of the angles. Because first and foremost, it's about making connections, right? It's bringing people in. And if that's all you get out of it, to me, that's enough, because we all need connections. We all feel isolated. We're all human. It's just nice to feel heard sometimes. So I think that all of these things are important, but making connections first. And then, because you make a connection and because these listening circles create the safe space, then we have this better ability to face history. We have this better ability to hear these hard stories, to process these things together. And that in itself can be healing. And the relationships that are created when that happens can lead to more healing. And the taking action part is what, we can also use these circles to brainstorm ideas. It really allows for kind of just a different sense of creativity, because it's a different kind of space. It's a different kind of space than we're used to functioning in. And that's what I love the most about them. So on to kind of like, what are circles? So circles are, first of all, not our idea, not new at all. They have been kind of just used in indigenous cultures for millennia. It's just, there's a restorative justice world that is kind of reclaiming, making our own these ways of knowledge that have been with us for all time. And I personally think it's really great just to put a different context on our time, on the way of thinking than we do in typically when we're going about society, we're capitalism, we like gotta go, we gotta do. And this is just a very different way of being. So when I guess I'll just say, I'm speaking for Pacem and Terris. So we hold these circles for people. And when we hold the circles, what we're believing in is there are 7 core assumptions, which I personally really love and I find very powerful. And these are the assumptions that we hold. These are the reasons why we think the circles are important, why they're powerful. The 7 core assumptions are: The true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful. The world is profoundly interconnected. All human beings have a deep desire to be in a good relationship. All human beings have gifts, and everyone is needed for what they bring. Everything we need to make a positive change is already here. Human beings are holistic, and we need practices to build habits of living from the core self. That is from two great peacekeepers, peace workers, Carolyn Boyes Watson and Kay Pranis. Also a lot of amazing material that they have written. But when we're holding a circle, we're operating from these core assumptions. But that's not to say that we expect people walking in off the street to know that or to also agree with them. And so that's why one of the most important things that we do when we're holding these circles is we have to create a set of shared values at the beginning of every circle process, which is why, honestly, circle dialogues can be long. And if you're going to use them to facilitate some type of conflict resolution, they're definitely going to be long, and there's going to be a lot of them, but absolutely have to, at the beginning, create a set of shared values that we all agree to. And we just ask everyone who comes into this space, what do you need from the other people here in order to be open, in order to be vulnerable? What values do you need the other people here to hold that will allow you to be your full self? And just that exercise right there is huge. I mean, it's wonderful. I hope that at some point each of you get to witness one of these circles, be part of one. And if you guys are interested, I know you guys are talking about this book you're reading, High Conflict, which I love that you're doing that. And this goes so hand in hand. Circles are the most perfect way to talk about conflict, to work through it. So I personally and Pacem would love to be part of some type of collaboration if you guys want to have circles within your own group. But yes, the values, setting that shared set of values that we start from, then we can all sit in this space and know I can speak and I'm not going to be judged, right? It's safe for me to tell my story here. And I'm with other humans who value me as a human. When we can all feel that way, it just opens up a whole different world. And then after the values part, the other crucial part is the talking piece. We're going to try to do a little bit here. There's obviously, we're not in person. There's no talking piece, but I know how to facilitate this over Zoom. So I'll show you a little bit. We'll get to do a couple questions, but really the value of the talking piece is, and I'm very aware that I've been talking for a long time, so apologize for that. But the talking piece is just something that you hold that gets passed around the circle. And the only person who is talking is the person who's holding the talking piece. And what that does is it creates an environment where you're listening just to listen. You're not listening to say what you're going to say to them. You're not thinking about your response. Hopefully you're not judging. Most of the time, non-judgment comes up in the values that we set in the beginning, but you're just taking that time to listen, because when that talking piece comes to you, that's your turn to say whatever you want, and know that you won't be interrupted. Know that whatever you say is okay because there's no judgment. Being able to express yourself like that is not something that we experience much in life. Not in the workplace, probably not in your, personal lives, your relationships. This just practicing the circle dialogue is just so foundationally important to all of these aspects of our lives, especially when we're doing this hard work of trying to lift up a hurting community. So we have the values, we have the talking piece that's creating this safe space, and it really is pretty magical. People do respond really beautifully to that type of environment. And I personally just really love it. So when we're talking about the transforming historical harms framework, we'll go back to the 4 components and want to think about, okay, so what is so important, or what is it about the circle process that really makes it so that it can do all of these 4 things: facing history, making connections, healing wounds, and taking action? It really is through the safe space, and then also through the intentional crafting of questions. So that is kind of like the circle keeper's job. And if they're doing a good job, you probably won't even know that they put so much thought into, what are these questions? Are they going to open us up in a positive way? Are they going to open wounds that we're going to feel and leave here feeling more raw than when we came? And that's not good. You know, we have to think very deeply about what are we getting at? What are we getting to? And how do we get there? So we want to be able to have people feel safe telling their story. We want to have it be in a way that doesn't open up something that you can't close in the time that you have with the circle. So some of the questions that we can ask about people's lives are really surprising. It surprises me what comes up. I think it's just natural that we don't realize how much we don't know about each other until we ask these really, kind of sometimes simple questions. But I was talking earlier about the importance of hearing 2 sides of the story. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my story, because it's directly related to what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now. I am half Jewish. My mother is not Jewish. So to my Orthodox family, I am also not Jewish. So I have developed a very strange sense of being not part of something, being othered. And there's been a big rift in my family that has gotten better over the generations, since the older folks have, honestly, who didn't, sat Shiva for my family when my grandmother converted to Christianity. So it's the Israel-Palestine thing has always been very, very really hard and divisive for me. With family that lives in Jerusalem that doesn't see me as family, with myself seeing the horrors of life in Palestine, and also seeing my own family that won't recognize what's happening because they have generational trauma where Jews were hunted down, and I have to protect my people, and I can't look at that other story. So it's always been really hard issue for me personally. But because I do have cousins who live in Jerusalem, I reached out to another cousin who's here in the States just a few days ago. I needed to check and make sure everybody was okay. We love each other, we're family, but we have very, very different views. And I just needed to listen and make sure that he knew that I loved him. He knew that I loved my family in Israel. And I was just there to listen. And so I listened, and, he obviously, there's a lot of pain going on right now. There's so much hurt on every side, and so many lives lost. And it's really tragic. When he said to me, like, it's the strangest little detail that really got me, that really took me down. Not even these horrific things that, like, we can't even mention, but it was this little video of this 6-year-old boy, the 6-year-old Jewish boy, and these the Palestinians were just poking him and hitting him and saying, "You dirty Jew," and I'm just here to listen, right? I'm not we haven't created this safe space where it's a, we can listen to each other's stories. I'm just listening to my cousin. But the thing that came up in my mind was, guess what? I saw that exact same video a year ago, but it wasn't a Jewish boy who was getting poked. It was a Palestinian kid. Now, I can hold that in my heart, and I can know that there are people hurting on both sides of this. And there's so much anger and bitterness against this enemy that actually is literally the exact same video. I mean, it couldn't be more parallel. And so it just really resonated in my mind as I'm thinking, if we could have a space to tell these stories, right? We would find out that someone on the other side had a very similar story. And wouldn't that really change the way we saw them? I I think it's so powerful to be able to hear the story of someone who really, they might live like 2 blocks from you. And how much do you know them? And how much do you know what they and their family have been through? And how much do they know about you? How much are we judging each other based on the fact that we've never heard each other's stories? So that's me talking a lot. I know there's only 10 minutes left, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, there's 14 of us here. So we'll probably just do one prompt, but it'll be a fun one, and you guys will all get to experience it. And it will just be, a way for us to kind of look at the power of the circle. So before I ask the question, what I'm going to do is, does everybody have something to write down with? Okay. I'm going to go in the order of my screen, and I'm going to tell you whose name to write down, because when you're finished speaking, you're just going to say that person's name, and then it's going to be their turn. That's how we're going to pass the talking piece. Okay. So, I'm going to write down Lynn, because you're to the right of me. Lynn, you're going to write down James. James, you're going to write down Sue Weisinger. Sue, you're going to write down Roger. Roger, you're going to write down Jane. Jane, you're going to write down Michael. Michael, you're going to write down Sally. Sally, you're going to write down Judy. Judy, you're going to write down Lucy. Lucy, you're going to write down Marge. Marge, you're going to write down Norm and Judy. Oh, sorry if there's doubles here. Norm and Judy, you're going to write down Sandy. Sandy, you're going to write down Sue Linderman. And then it will be back to me. Did everybody get it? So all you have to do is, I'm going to ask the question, and I'll go first. And then when you're finished speaking, just say the other person's name. And then when you hear your name, you take yourself off mute and you go ahead. So I'm going to ask, and also another thing that I'm going to say about circles, it's always an invitation. You never have to share. The magic of it happens because everyone is doing it willingly. Everyone wants to be here. Everyone wants to participate. And if you don't feel comfortable, you absolutely don't have to share. That's why I'm going to say, I will invite you to tell me. I don't think anybody's going to pass, because the question that I'm asking you, I'm inviting you to tell me the story of your name. So I don't want you to just tell me like, oh, this is my name. You can tell me anything about it. Where did it come from? Who named you? What does it mean to your family? What does it mean to you? How has it resonated with you throughout your life? Just tell us the story of your name. So I will start. My name is Sarah Green. Very biblical. Like I said, I'm half Jewish. My mom is Christian. My dad is Jewish. So we all got the biblical names. It's a pretty common name, especially when I went to University of Pennsylvania. There are about a million Sarahs and a million Greens, and actually a bunch of Sarah Greens. So, it never really meant too much to me until I worked at a camp one year and there were lots of Sarahs and there were lots of Greens. So I like tried on a nickname. So someone from England had he called me Saz because apparently that's a nickname for Sarah when you're in England. So I tried it on just for a couple months and I was Saz for a couple months. And after that, I was like, actually, I really am Sarah. So after that, I feel like the name really resonated with me. Before it kind of was like, well, everybody has this name, but after going without it, it just like it made it stick. I really like my name because my favorite color is green and I love plants. So I think it's super fitting to me, but I had to grow into it. So I'll pass it to Lynn.
So I was born with the name Lynn Elizabeth Anderson. And I don't really know how the names were chosen, but Lynn was not a family name as far as I know. Neither was Elizabeth. I think they were just names that my parents liked when I was named Lynn Elizabeth. And when I got married and decided to lose the Elizabeth so that I could keep my maiden name Anderson and make that my middle name, I realized that I really wasn't upset at losing the Elizabeth. And that's because the only time it was ever used was when, as a child, I was in trouble. Then I was little Elizabeth. And that was the only time that Elizabeth was ever used. It was only when I was in trouble. So I was like, I really don't need to hold on to that. Elizabeth can just go away. And so I was fine losing that. And so now I'm Lynn Anderson Kilhorn. And I will now pass it to James.
Hello, everybody. My name. My name is originally I'm from Africa, Kenya. Um, my last name. I got to know my last name when I was almost 25 years old, and this was a friend. We just done. First of all, Sarah, thank you for what you're doing. Because I've been in in that field of volunteering work. And the reason I'm saying this is because when I was about to do that, and I was in an exchange program, and I was in Africa then, we were going to Europe, we were, we met together as all African kids, Kenyan kids, and we were being taught. And I'm 25 years old. I never got to be told what my last name meant from my own parents. So an uncle, because everybody who's like in Africa, everybody who's like your mom's age or your dad's age, we call them aunts and uncles. So I can call him an uncle. He's the one who pulled me on the side and asked me, "Do you know your name? If you went somewhere overseas and they asked you what your name means, what do you say?" And I said, I never thought about it. Nobody ever told me what it means. So then he told me the meaning of my name, which means porcupine, right? A porcupine. And I'm like, what? So I asked, why was I named a porcupine? And so he said that based with the you say you're talking about generational things that happen, it's handed over and over. So my uncle, my mom's oldest brother, so that his name can live on. And I didn't grow up with a dad. So my mom had to name me from her side of the family. So she named me after her oldest brother, who was called James Shege, right? So now I'm James Shege Jr. So then I found out when he was born around that time, in their village. Now, not even the suburbs, in the village. If you go to Africa, there are people who are born in mad houses, like houses made out of dirt. So around that time when he was born, there was a lot of what did I say again? My name? Porcupine. There was a lot of porcupines around that area. So when he was born, there were rampant porcupines around that area. So that's how he ended up with that name. And generational wise, I ended up with that name. So that's how I have that name. And I bet you all know what a porcupine is, right? And there's a meaning to it. A porcupine doesn't mess with nobody. It just minds its own business, right? Minds its own business. If you watch even on YouTube, you'll find a leopard who tries to mess with a porcupine, and the end result is not usually good. So, in other words, they say my temperament was like, all right, James is cool. James gets along with everybody until you poke your finger on him. And then the porcupines, all those needles come out. So, so that's what it means. All right, I'll go ahead and pick. Yeah, do I need to pick somebody? Right.
Oh, just call on, well, Sue's the next one in the
Next one, yeah. Okay. Pebbles, right?
All right. So I'm up, right? Okay, so when my mother was convinced when she was pregnant with me that she was having a boy. The whole world had told her she was having a boy. Having a boy would make my paternal grandmother ecstatic, which she worked very hard to try to please my paternal grandmother. So she just was convinced, and so she went into labor, and it was during the war, so that a lot of times they just knocked the woman out, and she had the baby, and they dealt with it later on. So my mother woke up having had her baby and still thought she'd had a boy. So her best friend came to visit with pink balloons, and my mother's like, "Oh no, I had a boy. You're wrong." And she couldn't convince, she was just convinced. So her friend, being very practical, went down to the nursery and got me and brought me to my mother, who then knew she had had a girl. But they had no girls' names. So they thought, the paternal grandmother again, that they would name me Margaret after her. And she said, no, she hated her name. And they could not name me after her. So I ended up being Susan, which I think must have been a really popular name around then, Sue Linderman. And Winifred after my paternal grandmother. And I grew up as Susan, but I really didn't like the name because, once again, my parents, when I was bad, would call Susan Winifred, and we knew who was in trouble. So when I got control of my name, I became the Sue. So ever since I controlled how I'm called, I'm a Sue. And to this day, I will do that. I'll give people my legal name, and then I'll say, but please call me Sue. So, and I'm passing on to Roger.
So my full name is Roger Arthur Reinecker. Like they say in Game of Thrones, first of his name. So there was no Roger in the family that I can find before me, but the doctor that delivered me was Roger Batchelor. My mother denied that I was named after him. So I don't know quite where they got it. It was a name they liked. If I was a girl, it would have been Marjorie. I saw that on a list of names that they had put out, and somewhere in that were a couple of check marks on my name and Marjorie. My middle name is maternal grandmother. That name goes back to Scotland. And the Arthur family came in through Canada and New Brunswick. The last name was a good German name. I've traveled in Germany, and they say, hey, that's a really good German name you've got there. I said, I know that. I did not ascribe any meaning to it until a couple of years ago when a friend of mine who's French and from Alsace and knows German and French and Italian and a couple other languages, I think, said, oh, probably that means land along the Rhine, which maybe that's good. So Rhine acre, so perhaps land along the Rhine. And that's about all I know. And I pass it on to Jane.
All my family members were named with one syllable names because my last name was Manifold and my mother wanted to keep it simple. So I was Jane, Bruce, Joyce. Anyway, they were all one syllable. When I went to college, there was several Janes in our sorority, so I became Liz. And I too tried that out for a while and went back to Jane. But my grandmother was Lizzie, and I have a granddaughter, Lizzie. So, and I pass it on. Well, I was supposed to go to Sue, so I don't know who has it now.
We can go to Michael.
Okay, Michael.
Is that, am I screwing
There we
things?
go. Hi.
Hi.
Yes. My father was Dutch, and he came over second generation on the boats and went through what's the entry up in New York or New Jersey? I'm just blanking out right now. Anyway,
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's where they came from. Yes. I'm the youngest of five. My name is Michael Brian Gnade, and Gnade is spelled Gnade. But I had cousins who are from Holland that visited years ago, and they said it's Gnade and it'd be Genade. So that was kind of strange, but it actually makes more sense because when I always give my name for any reason, they always spell it, I say Gnade, so they make it Ganade all the time. And I always have to correct them. It's Gnade. So anyway, you know, that being said, other than a unique name with a spelling that's somewhat different than what was expected, my parents just gave me the name, I think, because it was popular at the time. And that's about it. And I think I move it and pass it over to Sally next.
I think Sally had to leave, so suggested
Okay.
that you pass it to, who is next?
We'll go to, how about to Lucy? If I'm screwing up the order, then I'm just gonna call on you guys, or you can call on someone who hasn't gone.
Sally said it should be passed to Judy.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. I'll just make this very brief. I was named Judy by my sister, who was 7 years old. Actually, she was 6 when I was born. There was a very popular story book called Jim and Judy. And since she had a brother named Jim, well, obviously I should be Judy. And I'll pass it on to Lucy.
Yes.
Lucy, you're still on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Just funny you should ask. I have my daughter and I my daughter is doing ancestry, you know, the genealogy study. And I just learned not long ago that my father's mother had a sister, and her name was Emma. But it seems like the name Lucy is further back than the 1860s or something like that. But anyway, my grandmother or great grandmother's name was Lucy, and she had a sister named Emma. And as I've grown up, every time I meet somebody new in the family, they all say my aunt was named Lucy, you know, but I never hear anyone say anything about Emma. But that's just a quirk in our genealogy. Anyway, when I was a little girl, I used to sit and talk with my dad once in a while, and there was a plaque that had my full name on it. Like, my name is Lucy Viola Johnson. And it was something that my mother said, my father or somebody said, oh, that came off of the casket. Well, strangely enough, the date of that born date was May 17th, whatever year it was, anyway. And my birthday is May 19th. So my children would come visit my father and mother, and they would look at this plaque, and it had my name on it, and they would look around, and they was wondering what's going on and on. So my father sat them down, all three of them, and said, this is the story. Your mother is named after your great-grandmother and your grandmother. So that they wouldn't get, and my name is the same as that. And so they wouldn't get confused as whose death day that was on. And it's always been a different story every time Stephanie tells it, but it is very interesting to see that through 3 or 4 generations, you know, that particular name. Well, that's all I have to say. And Marge, it's your time to shine.
Thanks, Lucy. So my given name is Marjorie Gale. I have no idea where they came from. There were no other names like that in my family, but growing up, I was Margie to everybody until in the middle of college when I met the person that would become my husband. He called me Marge, and ever since then, the people called me Marge. So you kind of know who knew me when by how they call me, because my earlier friends still call me Margie. But my last name now is Johnson, but my maiden name was Crooks. And my family used to say I had a sister, my family used to say to us when we'd go out the door for a party or a date or whatever, their parting words were, remember, you uphold the Crook's name at all times. So at some point in there, I became aware that people got their last names from their profession. And I began to think, I wonder what they think they're telling me when they say that to me. But anyway, that's my name. And I'm supposed to pass to Norman Judy.
Hi. Judy is short for Judith. Judith is a biblical name. I have a middle name of Grace, so it's been Judith Grace. Sometimes that's what they refer to me as. My maiden name was a really long German name, Kalkbrenner. And so when I got married to Norman, my brother asked me if I was going to be one of these modern people to have, you know, Kalkbrenner / Moore. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not spelling that name again. So it's just Judith Grace Moore. And the word Judith means praised. So I've tried to live a life of praise. I'm to pass along to Sandy.
My name is I was named Sandra Kay, and my last name was Waters with 2 T's. And I was always just called Sandra until I got into school, And then they started calling me Sandy. My mom never intended for me to be a Sandy, but you can't tell the kids that. So I was Sandy Waters, and they always spelled it Sandy. And I really didn't like being water with sand in it. So, and more subject to jokes that way. So when I was in junior high, there was something that went around that was called slam books. And people would put your name at the top of, they'd have a notebook. Your name would be at the top of the page. And people number 1 through however far it went. And so everybody would get the slam book, put their name in the back, and then they would say something about you. Usually it was nice. Usually it was, oh, great girl. So anyway, in these slam books, people had signed my name, Sandie. And so I said, I like that. I'm going to borrow that. So since then, I have been Sandie, Sandy Waters. And then when I got married, I kept the IE and Sandy Waters Reinecker. And officially my name is still Sandra. But anyway, that's the story of that. And I'm passing it to Sue Linderman.
So my name is Suzanne Lee. My last name was Rowell, which is very strange. And I kept saying it's like Powell with an R, because it could be pronounced about 900 ways. But I was named Suzanne, I was told, because that was my mother's favorite doll's name. But so I felt very privileged. Of course, I was the first, so, you know. But when she would be angry with me, she would call me Suzanne Lee. So Lynn, I relate. So I became Sue. In later years, I've picked up Suzanne every now and again when I feel like I need to be a little bit more formal. But I am quite clear, I am not a Susan. So if you call me Susan, I don't respond. It's not my name. So. And Bob George has joined us without instruction, but perhaps he would like to talk about the derivation of his name.
Well, thank you, Sue. As someone whose mother's Susan and her daughter's Susan, I won't hold it against you that I won't be able to think of you as a Susan. But my name is Robert Thornton George, and my Robert is after my mother's father, who was the dean of the dairy science department at Ohio State. Very much of a scientist. I am told he invented the square milk bottle. That's one of the things that he did, and also the butter cow for the Ohio State Fair. So and mother was a very big fan of Ohio State, and my father was from West Texas, and he was and so my middle name is Thornton after his mother's family. And the Thorntons were kind of famous in West Texas. The original Tex Thornton was the one who went around and blew up oil wells with to put out fires and stuff. And his son went to work for the Army Air Corps and started what was called the Whiz Kids. It included people like Bobby McNamara and Romney and those folks that developed mathematical ways to run businesses and stuff like that. So and so I was called, Bobby by my mother, and Robert, when they were angry with me, and I now have a book and articles for the paper, and it's under Bob George, and so I go by different monikers. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for your patience, as I know it's after this is supposed to end, but I just want to say that was really enjoyable. I just got to know a whole lot about all of you, and I know that you guys see each other a lot probably, but I hope that maybe you learned something about one of your friends that you didn't know before. And I think that is the beauty of the circle, is that you choose the question and you can learn about people because we've created this safe space, and learning about each other and connecting is really like the basis for all of this work. So I know you probably usually like ask questions and stuff, and Lynn, are you gonna
And I'm sorry, we do usually ask questions, but we try, even though we do sometimes go over 8, we do try to stop it by 8:15, which we're already past this time as
Gotcha.
well. So we're going to skip the questions, but I do want to thank you so much for coming and joining us. And we'll have to talk more about how we might be able to start a circle with this group or something. So we'll do that offline. But I think Sue Linderman will do a plug for next week's class. Sue, do you want to tell us what that's going to be?
Yes, next week, Becca Cotto of YWCA Delaware. She is the Director of Racial and Social Justice and Advocacy for that organization. And she is going to talk about the work that they do and a new advocacy initiative that's being created. And so I think you'll be intrigued to hear her description of the work that they are leading and the ways in which we all might get involved in helping to make a difference in our state. So we look forward to seeing you next week.
And thank you. If anyone did not get Sarah's email address, which she put in the chat, you know how to reach me and I can connect you with her. So anyone who wants to reach Sarah, you can do that.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Sarah. It was just great. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. And yeah, please reach out if you had any questions or want to talk or learn more. Please feel free to reach out. It was lovely being here. Thank you.
All right. Good night, all.
Night.